in the historic grid, historic grid, but we think, of the other parts of the city and applying that same kind of creativity to all these other street types that, and, kind of giving that palette over to the community, that I think excites me a bit.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it's a great idea. It's something that definitely wasn't brought up either.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up a little bit on that too. And hello, Katie. It's been a while since I've seen you. I remember kind of, at least when I was first introduced to kind of the idea of open streets and learning more about it, this idea around play streets was something that there was, at least in the group that I work in, there was talk about, but nothing was ever really done, and that I know of anyway, that our group was directly involved in. But it does seem like with that it would be kind of a good next step for, especially in areas like East Portland, where there is a dearth of, there aren't a lot of parks and open space, green space for kids to get out and play that are definitely we need to invest in more parks and open spaces and green space, plant more trees. But it does seem like a way to sort of take what we're already doing with the healthy business streets, and in areas like East Portland where there aren't little charming neighborhood nodes like in the inner city, and create streets that or assist the community in creating a vision for their streets that they could open for kids to play, families to gather, things like that, and that wouldn't be commoditized or have businesses associated with it. So that was just kind of one thought that I had.
So thank you so much for sharing that, Barbara. I want to point, I see, Brian, that you have yourself unmuted, so I imagine that puts you in the queue. I wanted to just kind of take the last two things that were said and mold them together, because I do think this idea of repurposing space, but also it was pointed out by Leslie that there's this potential problem of being paternalistic. And I think that one way of thinking about that that's sort of still related to the protest in general is, creating the opportunities without pushing them onto folks. So like when these things start to flower, as what we saw with the protests, when they were met with resistance by the state, a police presence, finding opportunities for PBOT potentially to keep that open is one avenue toward this, right? It's just allowing ourselves to not kind of react the way we have, and then also responding to a historical injustice, which is, that's not by accident, right? That plays out on historical lines of systemic racism, why there aren't as many green spaces in East Portland where most Black folks and people of color have resided. So these are great things. I just wanted to make sure I summarized for that. Go for it, Brian.
Yeah, I'm mostly here as a facilitator, so I just am not noticing too many people taking advantage of the Jamboard, and just want to direct people's attention towards it. And in case there's issues understanding how Jamboard works, you can just, there's a little bar on the side and it has different ways to add notes. And one of the main ones is the sticky note, which is right underneath the arrow. And then up top, there's different screens. So the first screen is the daydream screen, but then there's also a second and a third screen that you can move through that have different questions on them. Thanks so much to the people who have participated, and I hope more people will. Yay, thank you.
I don't really see the Jamboard, maybe because I'm using an iPad, just to let you know, so that's why I'm not participating in it. But the reason I unmuted myself, can you guys hear me? Okay, was I noticed that in my area, I know this is not just about business, but that's one of the reasons I joined this group, was I noticed in my area, I live in Selwood, that the only businesses that really seem to be part of these street plazas, which we have 3 of them, are the white-owned businesses mostly. And it got me thinking that possibly it's because the other businesses don't really feel welcome, or don't really know how to deal with it, or don't have the funding, or, so it just got me thinking that there's a lot well, my husband's a person of color. He says that he often doesn't feel welcome in places, open spaces especially. Um, but he's, you know, he's an environmental scientist, so he's been working on this for a long time. But it's just like, how can we help people feel included and welcome? And this also happens to women a lot too, where we don't feel welcome in a group of white men either. So it happens to, you know, maybe be something that we all need to ask people that aren't participating. What are your needs and what would you like and how can we help? That's all I had to say.
Thanks for sharing that. Would you mind if I asked you a follow-up question to that? Just to sort of
No, sure.
stick into the concept of like daydreaming. I mean, like, were there potentially, and this doesn't have to be specific to you, but were there potentially things that we saw during the pandemic that could be an opportunity to address that problem, right? The fact that there's a lack of welcoming. Maybe we can deconstruct that a bit further. Like, why is it unwelcoming? Is it the commodities that are being sold in these businesses? Is there a disparity that we're noticing there? I'm just kind of encouraging a further discussion on that. I think that's a great point.
So the businesses themselves, so some of the businesses have their own outdoor seating. So I realize that's obviously one thing. Maybe they thought, well, we don't need to participate in the street plaza. We have these 5 tables, you know, in front of our place. And the businesses are being used, but I just, you know, it's interesting to me to notice that we have these street plazas and they're some of them are being used a lot, but it's only, well, Selwood in general is quite a white neighborhood too. But, you know, and that's one thing that it would be nice if I saw that that maybe more people of color do feel comfortable coming here. And I don't know exactly how to bring them in, and that's kind of why I'm listening in now. And I definitely am going to talk to my husband about this whole workshop later on today when I talk to him, just to get some input from him too. But I know that in his experience that he often feels like actual hostility from people in some areas when they come across him because they don't know how to deal with them. This is how he feels. It may not be exactly, he even knows, sometimes maybe he's just misinterpreting it too. But I don't think he always is. There are definitely people in Portland that don't really know how to talk to him or deal with him. And I've seen it myself. So I know that's, you know, it's not just his imagination or anything.
I think that's great, and I appreciate that response. Actually, it's a great transition to the reality check, right? So maybe like we can talk about this further. We can come up with other answers to what we've already built on. You know, sort of the biggest barriers. One is microaggressions, and perhaps the conversation about the reality check is how, and we can think about this intersecting with the other opportunities that have been brought up about, you know, harnessing this moment, right? So what are potential ways in which that we've address this problem that have facilitated those microaggressions? By that, just speaking to businesses, for example, one question to think about is, you know, what's being sold and how does that cultivate a specific group of people that can potentially be hostile or not mindful of the broader reality at play?
I would say, even before we get into all the microaggressions and how they come up nonstop in Portland, because Portland's weird passively like that. One thing I've noticed is that some of these communities might not even know these are options, or they don't even know how to begin the process. So I think it's really important. And I've talked before to folks about this, is like building that playbook so that if you're a small business owner, you don't even know where to begin, how to get the permit, like how do you get the same information that some of these wealthier folks have, that they already are connected and they already know this? So how do you get that information to as many different folks as possible? I think that is one of the bigger barriers, is just the communication into these different groups.
Rita, I see that you're unmuted. Sorry, Kat decided to join. Or not. I thought I saw Rita was unmuted, but perhaps not. Other aspects of reality checks, just to lay out these ground rules. Again, this is, what are the barriers to what we've been envisioning as a dream here? So like we've talked about, opening up, opportunities for Black-owned businesses, but what are the reality, like what's the barriers to doing this? Like, why can't these things happen? Why haven't, like, what do we know about the past that tells us something about the future, for example?
Sorry, and not to,
No, you're fine.
I don't want to say anything bad about anybody's ideas or anything, but the idea of repurposing streets that haven't been completed could also kind of be taken offensively to those communities. I know, for example, my sister lives on a street that's not paved, and if she were told that, oh, it's going to be a park instead of a street, she probably would be pretty upset because like, oh, it happened again. I can't get the same access as everyone else. And so I can see that maybe not playing out very well. And so it's also thinking about those long-term consequences and having, again, not having also one person from the community represent everyone, like get multiple voices. So you get like the collective feeling and hearing from everybody as much as possible.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
I've noticed that people are scared to change is one reason why things don't change that easily. And it's hard, especially when it's a big change. And people sometimes feel threatened that their way of life, especially as people get older, they're scared and they don't understand the new stuff. I'm just thinking about my dad in general. He's that way a little bit. And it takes time and compassion to help some people change. I've noticed that. So that's all.
So I think I might have skipped over. Sorry, Allison, I told you were next, but
No worries.
Kimberly, I think you had raised your hand first. Do you want to go and then we'll go to, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly as well.
It's okay, it is Kimberly, but I think Allison did have their hand raised first, so please go ahead, Allison, and thank you.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to build upon the idea of people being kind of scared or worried about things that are new and different. From my experience in the public sector in park design, there was a lot of perception among stakeholders around various proposed open spaces that some of the activities that people who are living in the spaces need to do to live don't belong in the public sphere. And we understand, of course, why that happens, because if you don't have a house, then everything you do is conducted in the public eye. But I think that that is one place where the rubber meets the road as far as getting people to accept new and different kinds of spaces, is that there will need to be some strategies developed around managing that inherent difference between people who visit spaces and people who are living in spaces.
So my apologies, I came into this group a little late, so I might be missing what I'm supposed to be talking about. But I think just in regards to barriers, just from a personal experience of just being in the last breakout room, I'm a student here in urban and public affairs, but just going into that space with like people who were very professional, people who had planning degrees, we're all sort of speaking about really great ideas, but I immediately felt like I didn't belong there. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, even as like, I'm like, you know, quote, like an educated white woman, like I have privileges. Like I still felt kind of like, maybe I'll go into another room and see if I feel a little more comfortable, which is not anyone's fault. You know, it happens. And I think that one of the barriers that made me realize is like, who is coming into these conversations? Like, who are we inviting into the design process? Like just normal everyday community members who might not have a degree, who might have a language barrier, who might not be a professional. Like, how are we inviting those people into these spaces? Like I got this email because I'm a student and I know it's for PSU, but if we really want to get people's voices, their opinions, their lived experiences to shape like more equitable spaces, I think a huge component is like how we communicate that we want those people there. And then when they're there, how do we value their voices and make them feel welcome? Also, I love your cat right now, Julius. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, she's become kind of a rock star among my students because she's always in the background. So we have just under 3 minutes left. So I think it might be good to move into the last part, which is sort of, next steps, like, and specifically what it notes is like what groups or people, like you just brought this up, right? Who should be included, who should be working with, and maybe how this is related to these barriers. And so some of this is communication skills and knowledge barriers. Maybe what are next steps? How do we do that, right? How do we start to communicate with these groups that go beyond what we're doing here?
Hi.
Arva, yeah.
Yeah, hi. So I'm also a MORPH student at PSU, and I thought that communicating with the diverse group, I think one of the biggest thing that what comes to mind is that reaching out to these folks at the places where they are at, and not really inviting them to our spaces, but really reaching out to them in their space. I think could be a great way to really start that conversation and trigger that exchange of ideas with the diverse community. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing it.
Thank you.
Rita, I saw that you had been unmuted. Did you want to add? No? Okay, other folks have ideas about next steps, things to add? Please, Michelle, yeah.
I've talked a lot. I should have warned y'all before this. I would also add on to meeting community where they're at, and that has to do with making it accessible through recordings or newsletters, different languages, so that they can get that information at different times too, because a lot of BIPOC communities are constantly hustling and they just need that information, sometimes like as simple as possible and as many different formats that you can get it out is really key. Oh, and don't ask a question unless you can actually do something with the answer. I will put that out.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, please do put, if you do have access, that's a good one. We got under 16 seconds, so anyone wants to just chime in, go for it.
I just real quick, just wanted to mention to make sure that there's multiple opportunities. We're working in the middle of the workday. It's hard for some people to access these meetings, so multiple opportunities.
Well, I guess I'll see you all back in the big group because looks like we're out of time. Thanks everyone for participating. I learned a lot from you, so thank you for sharing your thoughts. I really appreciated it.
Thank you, Julius.
Thank you.
Thank you.